Hello and welcome to the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast. I'm your host, Nate Goss. As 2018 begins to wrap up and the holidays are upon us, we are happy to welcome back Reader's Advisor Joe Hansen for our annual Favorite Books of the Year episode. Joe is going to give us the rundown on the year in books here at the Cook Memorial Public Library District, the authors, stories, genres, and topics that defined and characterized the year. Joe is the mastermind behind our ever-so-popular Best of the Year booklets we release annually at the library. This is the 8th year Joe has solicited, culled, analyzed, and meticulously edited all of the library staff's recommendations into 2 compact collections, one fiction and one nonfiction. She is without question the expert with the expertise to help us look back on the year in reading at Cook Library, and I am confident after this episode you will be adding more than a handful of titles to your reading list, and maybe even doing some last-minute purchasing for that special reader in your life. So without further ado, Joe, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Nate.
This has been a great tradition that we've sort of started now on the podcast. But for you, these booklets have been an even longer tradition, 8 years, and it's definitely grown since then.
Yes, it has. The first year we had one booklet and I think we had 74 or something like that books. And every year it's grown and grown. And what we did grow this year was nonfiction. And we have 108 nonfiction titles this year. And it shows because we have a nice beefy nonfiction booklet. And we also have our beefy fiction booklet, which is 156 books in fiction. So for a total of 264 books between the 2 booklets.
Wow.
Part of it, these booklets help us as staffers to recommend things, especially on genres we don't read that much about, but also, it helps the patrons so they can look and find something in there. There should be something for everyone in these booklets.
Yeah. Now, before we jump right into the year and talk about some specific books and trends and whatnot, I should make it clear. So we are really just talking about adult books here, not
Correct.
So much children's.
Adult and young adult.
And young adult, okay. But we do have the holiday gift guide, which is going to include a few children's items, and that would just have a few tips and ideas for books that you might want to purchase that were sort of talked about in the year. So just letting listeners know that we do have that. But we're going to focus a little bit more on the adult collection for this episode. Let's start with the highlights. What were some of the most popular books?
It's funny because I know I define years by books, actually.
Okay.
And 2018 was the book of Educated by Tara Westover. We had 10 staffers recommend this book, which is unheard of for a nonfiction book and 10 staffers reading it.
And a debut book from the author.
It was.
Well.
It's just kind of a word-of-mouth book. I think the first person on staff who read it was Susie Piscini, and she's like, you have to read this book so we can talk about it. And so I read it, and then other people read it, and I got copies of it for my morning book club at Cook, which I lead, because I just wanted them to read it, and we had such a great discussion. So it's now also in our book club collection.
And the Aspen Book Club also read it.
Yes.
I think their debut title.
It was, because I did it first and then they did it. It's such a good book.
Yeah.
She's writing about her life as a child raised by 2 parents who are radicalized Mormons, like off-the-grid extremists. They always have their get-out bags because they think there's going to be an apocalypse and the government is going to take their guns. But I think the title of the book reflects how she wasn't allowed to go to school. Her mother pretty much gave up educating her at home, and so Tara just had a thirst for learning, and so she tried whatever she could to learn. And this woman ends up with a PhD from Oxford. So it's a pretty incredible story how she got out.
There's so much for every type of reader in that book, I feel like. She's very clear that this isn't representative of the Mormon church, that her family, they have some radical views that differ from the church quite a bit, but you do get a little bit of a glimpse into Mormonism. And then she's just a good writer.
Yeah.
She's really good. She knows how to spin a tale.
And the other thing, I keep track of all the best books of the year lists that come out, and Educated is the #1 top-rated book of the year for nonfiction. It's just a runaway book. So it's not just our staff.
And where possible, I'll probably highlight this. We do actually have a podcast episode on Educated where Susie Piscini, who you mentioned, is on that podcast episode along with myself and Andrea, the head of our Popular Services Department, talking a little bit more in detail about that book. So if you want to know a little bit more about that book, check out that podcast episode first. And, of course, we do have it at the library. What about maybe fiction? What's an example of a book that you think stood out as one that it seemed like every staff member had read?
Right. There are a couple. The first one, and it didn't really make that many best lists from the critics, but it's this one we loved as staffers, and it's called The Word is Murder by Anthony Horowitz. He wrote all the Foyle's War series for BBC. He's just a very prolific writer, and this is a fun book. A woman goes and plans her funeral, and then the next day she's been murdered. Oh. And so you follow that. So if you like a good murder mystery, good British mystery, it's a lot of fun. The other one that 7 of us read that made a lot of best of the year lists is called An American Marriage by Tayari Jones.
Yeah.
Excellent book, and I listened to it as an audiobook, and boy, is it good. It's letters back and forth between this husband and wife. The husband is falsely accused of rape, and he, is an innocent man, is sent to prison, and he had just gotten married, and so this is newlyweds, and they're trying to save their marriage while he's in prison. You can imagine the strains on their marriage. It's just such a well-done book, great audio book. The other one that 7 staffers read, and I really want to read, is called Circe by Madeline Miller. And this is kind of a Greek gods mythology book.
Okay.
And it's got the most beautiful cover. So it's kind of fantasy, but with Greek gods as an inspiration.
Yeah. So a little bit of everything there in what you just mentioned. A murder mystery, something more literary fiction, and some fantasy as well. So
and then if you want a good thriller, 6 staffers recommended Our House. This woman comes home and finds out her ex-husband, I guess, sold the house from under her, and these strangers are living in it. And I have not read it yet, but I know a lot of people on the staff were reading it and comparing notes.
Yeah.
And if you want more of an uplifting, fun, feel-good book, so 6 of us also read The Summer Hours at the Robbers Library by Sue Halpern. I think librarians have a love for books about libraries. And books about bookstores, And this
letting our bias show a little bit there,
this one is about a librarian who works in this rundown industrial town, and she ends up having to mentor this teenager who has to do community service at the library. It's just a feel-good book.
Well, feel-good books are something that I feel like a lot of people are in search of right now. And in fact, we're going to be doing our Uplit reading club.
Uplit is kind of a new term in the book world. It means books that make you, has a feel-good story at the end. The characters might have struggles they're dealing with. There might be some sad things, but at the end it has a happy ending, and the characters turn out okay.
Yeah.
And so Summer Hours at the Robbers Library is one of those books. We're going to have a list of Uplit titles for patrons. And if you read a couple Uplit books, and your name will be put in a drawing for a gift card.
So in our booklets, as far as what's another, do you have an example of maybe another just more uplifting or inspiring story that came out this year?
One I know that Erica recommended was called The Lido, Lido, and it takes place in England, and it's, kind of a young person befriending an elderly person kind of story. So Erica highly recommends it, and she also did a book review on it, so we can link to that.
Oh, sure, on our Shelf Life blog.
Yeah, on our Shelf Life blog.
How did our booklets stack up against a lot of the major publication best of lists? Are there a lot of overlapping titles, or maybe what are a few that are very unique to us?
Yeah, we did a pretty good job at reading all the top books of the year from the critics, like the New York Times Best Books of the Year, that type. Those are the types of lists we're talking about.
Well, you mentioned Educated,
yes,
which is nonfiction. What seems to be topping a lot of the fiction
The
lists?
number one in fiction for the best list is called They're There by Tommy Orange, and several staffers read it, and they recommended it, but it probably isn't their favorite book of the year, even though it made the best, of all the fiction. One of the things that made a lot of lists, which is one of my favorites of the year, is called The Great Believers by Rebecca Mackay.
Okay.
Outstanding book. It was a finalist for the National Book Award. We were fortunate because Rebecca came to our library to talk about it, and it was so thrilling to have her back. But The Great Believers is about the AIDS crisis in Chicago. And it tells 2 stories, from that period of the AIDS crisis and then current day, where she looks at the characters and how the AIDS crisis affected them in current day. It's such a great book. And if you like historical literary fiction, please give that a read. Another one of my favorites that it may maybe 3 or 4 lists, but it's not up there. It wouldn't come on the radar for like the best books of the year, but I really loved it, and so did several other staffers. It's called November Road by Lou Berney. Now, this is a suspense book, but it's historical fiction, too. It takes place right after the JFK assassination, and this mob guy who didn't really realize at the time that he was connected with the JFK assassination, because it goes on the premise that the mob killed Kennedy.
All right.
And so he had to hide the getaway car in Dallas. And then he realizes after he does this that he's being targeted by his mob boss because they're killing everybody who had anything to do with it. And so he takes off and goes on the Route 66 road trip trying to escape the mob. And along the way, he meets this housewife with 2 little girls who she's escaping a really bad marriage. So she just decided to run away. And they kind of fall in love with each other on the road. And so you've got a little bit of a romance, but you got the suspense, the mob guy chasing him, and you get all this wonderful Route 66 and 1960s references. Lou Berney really knows how to write. And so pick that up if you want a really good read.
So what I want to do is just almost quickly just kind of throw out a few different types of books or different things about books that people might be looking for, and then see if you can come up with just a title that you can think of in the booklet that comes up with that. So, So for instance, I think you already mentioned one, but what about audiobooks? People who love audiobooks. Did you have a title that comes to mind that staff members said you should do the audio of this, or you did and you thought the audio was great?
Well, my favorite audiobook of the year was Calypso by David Sedaris.
Can't go wrong with a Sedaris audiobook.
David Sedaris is always best on audio because he narrates it. And David Sedaris is getting older, and he's having health issues, and he's always funny, but he's really addressing some serious issues, like getting older, and his father's in his 90s. He also addresses the suicide of his sister, which, was very hard on the family. But boy, it's just such a good audiobook. Whenever a Sedaris book comes out, I always have to listen to it.
Yeah. Okay. What about comic books?
Oh, there's one graphic novel that 4 staffers recommended, and it's a young adult graphic novel called The Prince and the Dressmaker by Jen Wang. And it's just an adorable book, It's about a prince who is actually a cross-dresser. He has a dressmaker come in and makes all his clothes, and he goes out at night in public as this beautiful woman in fashion.
But he's the prince.
He's the prince. And they fall in love. It's just a sweet book. And you recommended a Beatles book, I believe.
Oh, sure, yeah. I'm a Beatles fan, and Bill Morrison, who's a comic writer and illustrator, he did the Beatles' Yellow Submarine as a comic book.
Cool.
So, if you're a fan of the Beatles, if you like Yellow Submarine,
and I do,
the comic book is great. It's got amazing colors in it, and I did a really good job of adapting the movie and the song into this comic book format. And that came out this year, so it was nice. Let's do long and short. Someone who wants like a short read versus someone who wants a really long kind of epic read.
Okay. Short read is one that you recommended, and that's how I read it. Fox 8 by George Saunders.
Yeah, you will always have me talking up George Saunders.
Oh, yeah. Fox 8 really surprised me. It's kind of a fable, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it reminds me kind of Aesop's Fables a little bit.
A little bit, but it also kind of reminds me of the Lorax from Dr. Seuss, where he's kind of warning about what we're doing to the environment.
To nature, yeah.
In nature.
About a fox, and it's written by the fox. So you get this, what I love about Saunders is his playfulness with language. And so you get this fox who taught himself how to write by listening to a mother read stories to her children through the window. He kind of observes this and learns how to write. So you get sort of these misspellings and weird grammatical things, but they all kind of add charm to the whole story.
And he talks about the humans. Yeah, it's a great.
And it's a nice short book. Okay, so how about someone who wants something that they're going to spend a lot of time with, a long book?
Well, one of the longer books I read, J.K. Rowling's newest mystery, where she writes under the pen name Robert Galbraith.
Okay.
And it's called Lethal White, and it's her newest book on the Cormoran Strikes mystery series. It is a very long book, well over 500 pages, but it's really well done if you can stick with it.
Great. And then one type of book that I love we add in our booklet, but you don't see in a lot of year-end lists, is cookbooks. Do you have a good cookbook that you could recommend that's in our booklet?
Oh, yeah. We have a lot of cookbooks this year. So if you're a cook, make sure you check that out. There's one that was recommended actually by 4 staffers.
Oh, great. All right.
And the author is Gina Homolka. And she writes these Skinny Taste books.
Oh, yeah. Well, she's got the Skinny Taste blog.
Yes.
Great. It's a great blog.
It is a great blog. And this one is called Skinny Taste One and Done, 140 no-fuss dinners for your Instant Pot, slow cooker, air fryer, sheet pan, skillet, Dutch oven, and more. And I actually bought the book because I liked it so much.
Oh, good. Well,
because I'm a gadget gal. My husband, I drive him crazy with all my kitchen gadgets. But it's just really good recipes, wholesome family recipes, and she tries to make them healthy. Mm-hmm. So that's a cookbook one. And I know you recommended a cookbook, too, and you did a blog post on it.
Yes, and I would highly recommend people go back. That was our last episode, actually, with Jen Siegel is her name. She wrote a book. This is her first cookbook called Once Upon a Chef, which is also the title of her blog. And I just recommend it because I swear I've made quite a few of the recipes in the book, and every single one has been reliably good and relatively easy as well. And where she's coming from, her kind of shtick or her thing is that she is a classically trained chef. She was someone who wanted to become a professional chef, was a professional chef for a while, and then when she had a family, realized that the lifestyle of being a chef wasn't quite conducive to being the mother she wanted to be. So she decided to instead take what she learned in school and apply it to this new blog. Her recipes are just always so tasty, and she kind of brings in that expertise that she learned in culinary school.
Yeah, I think there's at least 10 cookbooks this year in the nonfiction booklet. So if you like to cook, and apparently our staffers do, check that out.
And one last quick pick. I just want to know what your personal favorite is, the one that tops your list.
Beyond the ones I already mentioned?
Yeah.
Shout out again to The Great Believers by Rebecca Mackay and November Road by Lou Berney. I'll throw one other one in that we haven't mentioned yet. It's a young adult fantasy novel, and it's fantastic. And it's an amazing audiobook called Children of Blood and Bone.
Okay.
So good. And it's
I've heard
kind
that
of
one
kind of
a bit,
African-themed fantasy.
Okay.
And so if you like Black Panther, the movie, you might like this fantasy book. It's so good. And it's going to be a series, so check that one out.
Like a television series or a book series?
A book series, but I could see it easily becoming a movie.
Okay, but this is book one.
This is book one, Children of Blood and Bone. It's by Tomi Adeyemi. I gave it to my daughter who loves fantasy, and she just loved it so much.
Ate it up. All right.
Ate it up.
Good.
There's one other book that a lot of staffers love that I want to give a shout out to in the nonfiction book called The Library Book by Susan Orlean.
Oh, yeah.
And this one is about the worst library fire in American history when the Los Angeles library burned. And it's never been solved. She goes into the history of it and the investigation. And also she goes into why libraries are so important. So, of course, a lot of staffers recommended it.
So you've taken all of this in. You've kind of gathered everything put together. As you've spent time looking at this, did you notice any themes or topics that to you sort of seem to keep being brought up through the year? Things that we seem to be wanting to tackle right now in 2018, or moods that we're even trying to strike for 2018?
It's interesting. For the nonfiction, there's obviously a lot of books about politics because, we're going through some tumultuous times.
Yeah.
And plus, we've been 2 years out of the Obama administration now, so people are writing books and staffers are reading them. I personally am listening to Michelle Obama's memoir, which is really, Becoming. I really liked it. She narrates it. But so you'll see some politics in the nonfiction book. Like I said, it's timely. Just like when George Bush, 2 years after he was gone, there were a lot of books about his administration, looking back. And I think for fiction, what I'm noticing, and I really appreciate, is there's more diversity. Like An American Marriage, Children of Blood and Bone, both great African-American women who are writing books. The Tommy Orange book, it's a Native American. So I think the publishing industry and even libraries had been criticized that we don't embrace enough diverse authors, and I see that changing.
That's good.
So you're not just getting
right?
Yes, you're not just getting white men anymore. You're seeing Well, of course, women, we always had a lot of women, but people of color
Yeah.
and different ethnic groups being represented.
Sexual orientation with, great believers.
And also, the one I just said, the prince and the dressmaker, it's great. And I think that's good because it's good to read about a lot of different people.
Well, and it just makes reading more interesting.
It does.
You're reading more about things that are maybe a little less familiar to you.
Exactly.
Now, it's funny because this booklet just came out, but I'm wondering if there's any titles that even in the process of putting it together, you didn't have time to get in there and you just wish, oh man, I wish we could have gotten that in there.
Yes, either.
I just want to give you a chance. This is, because I have one too that I wanted to throw in, but it's too late. So I'll talk about one as well if you want to talk about one.
Actually, it's not so much something I've read, but something no one got to, One was called My Year of Rest and Relaxation. That made a lot of best lists, and no one on staff has read it.
It happens.
Yes, yeah. And I would have loved to put my name on Louise Penny's new book, but I never got a copy in time. Her book came out in December or real late November, which is unusual. Usually her book comes out right at the beginning of September. But Ellen got it read and got it into our booklet, so that's good. Because she's, like I said, our perennial favorite for mystery
Louise
writers.
Penny is, yeah.
Yes. But I didn't get to put my name on it. What did you read that you wish you could
So
put
I just finished last week. This is Mark Russell's latest comic collection that he put out. Mark Russell is who did the Flintstones series.
Right.
And we have an interview with Mark Russell that you can go back to our archives and listen to. And as we did our interview, he talked about what he was working on, which was Snagglepuss, his comic series.
Fun.
And it is so good. I mean, just like the Flintstones, it completely upends your idea of who Snagglepuss is. It's still the pink feline of some sort, but in this world, he plays a homosexual playwright in a Tennessee Williams sort of fashion, who has been brought forward to the House on Un-American Activities Committee to try to give names for the blacklist. And so you have a lot of, again, great social commentary. Huckleberry Hound is in it as one of his longtime friends who's an author.
Oh, I've got to read this one.
And it is so good because it's taking these characters that you grew up with and painting them in a light you never thought that you could have seen them in. But then when you see it, you're like, oh, of course. Why would I never have thought of them this way?
Yeah.
And in the process, really saying some profound things about our country, about our society and our culture. And it's very relevant to today, even though it's set in the 50s.
And I noticed you had it on Goodreads when you gave it 5 stars.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is
Without
the top
question.
rating. So, so yes, it won't make our favorites this year, but I will eventually get the Cook Library Goodreads account updated and put that in there. So, always, giving a plug to our Goodreads account. If you want to know what we are reading all the time, we have more than 2,000 books rated on Goodreads for the Cook Library, and it's real easy to follow us. Just go to our website, go to the bottom of the homepage, and there'll be a G for Goodreads, and you go there and send me a friend request because I will friend you back.
Yeah, all right. That sounds great. And then just before we go, do you want to just let everyone know exactly if they want to pick up these booklets, where they can get them?
Sure. We have them at both reference desks at Cook and Aspen Libraries. They are on our website, too, so you can look at a virtual copy of it, and you'll get a lot of great ideas. I know I have I'm going to spend January reading all the books I didn't have time to read.
Same here.
From this booklet, including like Circe and all these other books we've talked about, because I can't wait to get to them.
Yeah. All right. Well, Joe, it sounds like it's been a great year of reading for you and for the rest of our staff here. I just want to thank you so much for doing this again. It's always a great way to wrap up the year.
Thanks, Nate. It's been fun.
All right, so stop by the reference desk and pick up a copy of our favorites, or visit our website at cooklib.org. A few things before we go. Joe already mentioned our Goodreads account, which I highly recommend visiting, but also, while you're out there on the web, swing by our blog, Shelf Life, where all throughout the year we write about what we're reading, along with some local history, library news, genealogy, and a whole lot more. That blog can be found at shelflife.cooklib.org. Don't forget, you can always reach out to us anytime with your comments or questions. You can email us at webmaster@cooklib.org or talk to us on Twitter @cooklibrary is how you can find us there. If you like this episode, please share it with your friends and family and consider leaving a rating in Apple Podcasts. Those ratings go a long way in getting our podcast out to new listeners. We will be back soon, but until then, have a happy holiday and keep reading, keep watching, and keep listening.